Story 1. The glitch in the gate. When I was in college, I lived with two roommates, Sam and Chloe, in an older house off campus. It was a charming place, a bit run down with a big, overgrown backyard that backed onto a dense patch of woods. We were in a small university town, generally safe, and while the house wasn't brand new, it had character. Plus, the rent was cheap. It was late October, nearing Halloween, and the air had that crisp, eerie feel. My parents were visiting that weekend, and my mom, being super into autumn decor, had bought a whole bunch of pumpkins and gourds for us to put out. We spent a good part of Saturday afternoon arranging them on the porch and along the walkway. My dad, always the practical one, noticed the old wooden gate at the very back of our yard, leading into the woods. It was a bit flimsy. He tried to latch it securely, but the wood was rotten in places, and it just wouldn't hold. He shrugged, said, "Well, it'll keep most things out," and we all went inside for dinner. That night, my parents were out at a faculty dinner, and Sam, Chloe, and I were just chilling, watching a movie in the living room. It was around 10:30 p.m., and the movie was getting to its tense part when we heard it, a distinct, rhythmic creak. Creak, creak. It sounded exactly like an old gate swinging open and shut. We all froze, looking at each other. Sam was the first to speak. "Did you guys hear that?" Chloe, usually the bravest, looked pale. "Yeah, it sounds like..." The back gate. We had a motion-activated floodlight that illuminated the back of the house and part of the yard. It was usually pretty sensitive, triggered by squirrels or cats, but it wasn't on. We knew it worked because it would sometimes flicker on and off even with a light breeze. The fact that it wasn't on now with that creaking sound was unsettling. The creaking continued for a few more minutes, steady and persistent. It wasn't windy, so it wasn't just swinging in the breeze. Someone or something was opening and closing it, slowly, deliberately. We debated what to do. Call the police? Go check it out? We were all too scared to do either. We just sat there, huddled together on the couch, listening to that horrifying sound. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. We waited for what felt like an eternity. Sam finally whispered, "Maybe it was just the wind after all," but we all knew it wasn't. The air was still. We decided to just lock all the doors and windows and try to sleep in the living room. None of us wanted to be alone in our own rooms. The next morning, the first thing we did was go check the backyard. The gate was wide open, swinging gently in the morning breeze that had finally picked up. But that wasn't what made our stomachs drop. All of the pumpkins and gourds my mom and I had carefully arranged on the porch and along the walkway were gone. Every single one. There were no tracks, no disturbed dirt, just the empty spots where they had been. It was like they had vanished into thin air. My parents came home later that morning, and we told them what happened. My dad immediately went to the back gate. He found it. Not just open, but the latch, which he had struggled with the day before, was now completely broken off, snapped in two. He didn't say much, but his face was grim. The police came, but there wasn't much they could do. No signs of forced entry, no clear footprints, just a broken gate and missing pumpkins. They suggested it was probably some local kids messing around. But the way that gate creaked, so slow and deliberate, and the eerie silence afterward, coupled with the methodical disappearance of every single decoration, It just felt different. It felt like someone had been watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to send a message. We moved out of that house at the end of the semester. We never saw our pumpkins again. Story 2. The Midnight Gardener. This happened to me last summer, during the peak of my insomnia. I'm a night owl by nature, but last year it got really bad, and I was often up until 3 or 4 a.m. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Most of the houses are pretty spaced out with decent-sized yards. My backyard has a tall wooden fence, but beyond that it's a large, unkempt field that belongs to an old, abandoned farm property. No one ever goes back there, or so I thought. One particular night, it was probably around 2 a.m. and I was in my living room, scrolling through my phone, trying to tire myself out. The sliding glass door leading to my backyard was closed and locked, but the blinds were open, and I had a good view of the moonlit yard. Suddenly, I saw a figure in my backyard. It was a man. He was tall, thin, and wearing what looked like dark, old-fashioned work clothes, almost like a groundskeeper's uniform from the 1940s. He had a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, so I couldn't see his face, but what he was doing was what really made my blood run cold. He was tending to my rose bush. I have a small rose garden along the back of my house, and he was there, in the middle of the night, kneeling down, meticulously pruning the roses. He had a pair of gardening shears in his hand, and I could hear the faint snip, snip, snip through the glass. It was surreal. It was so unexpected, so calm, that for a moment I thought I was dreaming. But the sound was real. The man was real. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself invisible, even though I knew he couldn't see me through the glass at that distance in the dark. My heart was hammering. Who was this person? Why were they in my backyard at 2 a.m., pruning my roses? He worked for about 10 minutes, moving from one bush to the next, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Then he stood up, wiped his hands on his trousers, and slowly turned. He didn't look directly at the house, or at least not at the living room. He looked towards the back of the yard, towards the old farm field, and then he started walking. Slowly, deliberately, he walked to the back fence. He didn't climb it. He didn't open a gate. He simply walked through it, as if the solid wood fence wasn't even there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, thinking I must be hallucinating from lack of sleep. But he was gone. He had literally walked through my fence and disappeared into the overgrown field beyond. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally dared to, I stumbled to my bedroom, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling. The next morning, as soon as the sun was fully up, I practically sprinted to the backyard. The fence was intact. No holes, no broken slats. It was solid. But when I got to my rose bush, I saw it. Every single rose was perfectly pruned. The bush looked healthier than they had in months, and on the ground beneath one of the bushes was a single freshly cut rose laid neatly on the grass. I still have no explanation for what I saw. I never saw the man again, and I never saw the fence disturbed. But every time I look at those rose bushes, especially at night, I remember the snip, snip, and the way he just walked through my fence. I don't garden at night anymore, and I rarely leave my blinds open after dark. Story 3. The call from inside the house. This happened to my older brother, Mark, when he was in his early 20s. He was living in an apartment building in a major city, on the third floor. It was a pretty standard apartment, nothing fancy, but it was in a good, safe part of town. He lived alone and worked an evening shift, so he often didn't get home until after midnight. One night he got back to his apartment around 1:30 a.m. He was tired, just wanted to get some sleep. He walked in, tossed his keys on the table, and kicked off his shoes. As he was heading to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, his landline phone rang. Now, this was back when landlines were still common, but Mark rarely used his. All his friends and family had his cell number. He figured it was a telemarketer or a wrong number, but he picked it up out of habit. "Hello?" he said, a little grudgingly. There was silence on the other end, just a faint, crackling static. He was about to hang up when he heard a voice. It was a low, raspy whisper. "Are you alone?" Mark's blood ran cold. He immediately thought it was a prank call from one of his friends messing with him. He scoffed. "Very funny, guys. Which one of you is this?" The voice didn't respond. Just more static, and then that same whisper, closer this time, clearer. "I asked if you were alone." Mark felt a prickle on the back of his neck. This wasn't his friends. He knew their voices, and this was distinctly not them. He was suddenly wide awake. He didn't say anything, just listened. Then he heard it. The voice wasn't coming from the phone. It was coming from inside his apartment. He could hear the faint echo of the whisper, the way a voice sounds when it's just a few rooms away. "Are you alone?" Mark dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, still connected, and he could hear the static hissing from the receiver. He stood frozen in the kitchen, listening. The apartment was dead silent now, except for that faint hiss from the phone. He slowly, carefully, peered around the corner into the living room. It was dark, everything as he left it. He looked towards the hallway that led to his bedroom. Dark, too. He backed away slowly until he was against the kitchen counter. His eyes darted around the room. The front door was closed and locked, as he always left it. All the windows were shut. There was no way anyone could have gotten in. But he heard the voice. He knew he heard it. He grabbed the biggest kitchen knife he could find, his hand shaking so hard the knife clattered against the counter. He then slowly, meticulously, checked every single room in his apartment. The living room, the bathroom, his bedroom, the small study. Nothing, no one. Every door and window was still locked. He finally went back to the kitchen, picked up the phone. The line was dead. Mark didn't sleep a wink that night. He sat up with a knife in his hand until the sun came up, constantly checking every shadow, every corner. He replayed the call over and over in his head. The voice on the phone and then the whisper echoing in his own apartment. He called his landlord the next day, practically incoherent with fear, explaining what happened. The landlord, a gruff old guy, just told him he was probably tired and imagined things. But Mark knew. He knew what he heard. He moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later, breaking his lease and taking a financial hit. He just couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in his apartment, hiding, waiting for him to come home. Or maybe that they were still there, somehow, always listening. He hasn't had a landline since.